Bonsoir, citoyennes! Mesdames et messieurs, chers amis, good people of the city of Yorktown, my dear friends, please allow me an introduction. My name is Marie-Joseph Paul-Yves Rochebert du Motier, but I think most of you know me much better as le Marquis de Lafayette. And what a pleasure and honor it is to see all of you here on this magnificent evening, this 7th day of May of the year 1784, a day of celebration, is it not? How I love you Americans. Most of you have no idea why I am celebrating, yet you're celebrating right along with me. You know, I think that is a credit to the American people, how very optimistic you are, or perhaps always in want of a party. Well, whatever the case, my dear friends, it is a pleasure to see all of you. And why am I celebrating? Well, I shall tell you. It is my first return here to America since the great siege of Yorktown, which, of course, concluded on the 19th day of October of the year 1781, a day we shall never forget, for it is the day we won the greatest victory in the war! But more importantly than that, my dear friends, it is the fact that but a few short months ago, in September of 1783, the Treaty of Paris has been signed, thus making you, the people of America, officially free and independent. So, my friends, now you can see why I am celebrating, and I am sure that you are going to celebrate right along with me. So, my friends, let us never forget how this independence was in fact achieved. For all of those brave soldiers and civilians alike who fought, who died, who served this great nation of the United States of America, let us applaud them all! Ah, my dear friends, it is truly difficult to believe that this great war has finally come to a conclusion. You know, I can recall when I first heard of the great cause of American freedom, for it was back in 1776. I was but a sous-lieutenant, a second lieutenant, newly promoted to the rank of captain, only because my father-in-law owns the regiment. Well, it was then I was billeted at a place called Metz in the eastern part of France. And one evening we had a grand dinner party. That was not uncommon. Of course, many of the brother officers would gather and speak of the latest subjects of the day, perhaps this battle or that siege, or the latest writing of King Frederick II, or what the Habsburg Empire was up to, or the Ottoman Turk, or the Russians, whatever it might be, it was a subject for conversation. Well, we had a very special guest one evening, and that special guest was the Duke of Gloucester. Of course, that is the brother of George III, the King of England. So all of the officers, the noblest officers in all of France, were in attendance. There was, let me remember, the Duc de Broglie. He commanded in that region. Some of you perhaps remember him better from his exploits during the 7 Years' War. He, of course, commanded the French right wing at the Battle of Minden, the ill-fated Battle of Minden for us French. And some say that he was going to be given command of the Continental Army in the place of General Washington. A fine officer, but I think we are all thankful that General Washington remained in command, are we not? Yes. Indeed we are, my dear friends. Let's see, who else? Oh, of course, my dear friend, le Baron de Kolb, the one man perhaps most responsible for bringing me here to America. I recall receiving the news of his death after the Battle of Camden in August of 1780. Most distressful to me, but even more so to the great cause of American freedom, for he was such a fine officer. There was the Chevalier de Buisson. Madame? Yes? The Chevalier de Buisson? I thought I recognized you. Madame danced a minuet with the Chevalier no more than... It was 6 months... Oh, you did not forget, Madame. 6 months ago, she's being quite shy. Oh, and humble. It was 6 months ago at the court at Versailles. We were all celebrating, of course, this grand victory, the preparations for the signing of the Treaty of Paris. And you danced a minuet that no one had ever attempted before. Do you recall the name? Of course you do. Oh, It was called Le Dauphin. So difficult you must have left your time with the dance master for many months, but it was so perfect. No one could keep their eyes away from you. You are still the talk of Versailles. But you know, madame, I cannot say the same for your dance partner, the Chevalier. He was not a very good dancer. In fact, is monsieur a better dancer than that? If only we had some musicians present this evening, we could all see an example of that minuet. Would you like to see that, my friends? Alas, madame, I shall bring musicians next time. But forgive me, I have veered off the course of my story. Let me return. Well, my friends, that evening we spoke of many subjects. We spoke of your Declaration of Independence. We spoke of the members of your Grand Congress in Philadelphia. And of course, we spoke of the great man himself, that of General George Washington. And you know, dear friends, it was by the conclusion of this meal that I told my brother officers that I was ready and willing to fight, and if need be, die for this cause. Now, of course, all present might say to me, well, why, Monsieur le Marquis? Why would you want to go and fight and perhaps die in another man's war? For France and England were not at war at that moment. Why would you want to risk yourself in such an endeavor? Well, of course, you know the answer to that question. For this has been a war like none other in the history of man, has it not? A war of great ideas, of the freedom, even the liberation of mankind. A war that has embraced the ideas of the great thinkers of this, well, enlightened age. This age of reason, with men like Voltaire and Rousseau and Montesquieu, with men that believe that a man, no matter what station in life he might be born, whether he be black or white, Catholic or Protestant, rich or poor, slave or free, should not make a difference, but simply by the way in which that man will carry himself, by the way in which that man will prove himself in this world. My dear friends, are you still in agreement with these great ideas? Well, I'm pleased to hear it, as am I, as I shall continue to be. So that evening, I drew my sword. I came towards my host, the Duc de Broglie, and I told him I was ready to put my colors to this great and noble cause. But you know what he said to me? Sit down, Monsieur le Marquis. I do believe you've had a bit too much wine this evening. But friends, of course, it was not the wine. It truly was my enthusiasm for this great and noble cause. So what could I do? Well, I thought about it for some days, and then I said to myself, alas, I shall go to Versailles. I shall present myself at court in front of the King and Queen of France, that of Louis XVI, Louis XVI, and Marie Antoinette. So off I go to Versailles, presenting myself at court and asking the King and Queen if I might have the honor and pleasure of taking part in the noble crusade across the ocean. And what do they say to me? Oh, je regrette, Monsieur le Marquis, cela n'est pas possible. C'est un moment rare quand la France et l'Angleterre ne sont pas en guerre. Et je ne souhaite pas pour vous d'en commencer une. Oh, I'm sorry, Monsieur le Marquis, it is not possible, for it is indeed a rare time in French history where France and England are not at war. And I do not wish for you to start yet another war with that horrible nation of merchants. Well, what was I to do? The King and Queen of France tell me I cannot do it, so that should have been the end of it. But I did the unthinkable. I disobeyed them. I left my regiment. I went to the western part of France, and there at the port city of Bordeaux, I purchased a ship fittingly called La Victoire, the Victory. For that is what I was in search of, victory in this noble cause. Well, of course, the King and Queen of France soon found out that I, the Marquis de Lafayette, had disobeyed them. And, monsieur, do you think they were pleased? No, not at all. In fact, quite the contrary. They were quite displeased with me. In fact, they sent out dispatch riders, the gendarmerie, soldiers, anyone who could apprehend me. And if I was to be apprehended, of course, I was to return back to my regiment at Metz, or worse, to my father-in-law at Marseille. So I had to act with the utmost secrecy, preparing all that I would need. A crew to man my ship, companions, it is always better to travel with friends, all of the supplies that I would need, for I did not know when or if I would even return back to France. Well, when all was prepared, the harbor master at Bordeaux inquires, "What is your destination, monsieur? Where are you headed?" Not realizing at that moment that I was, in fact, the Marquis de Lafayette, for of course I had disguised myself. And, well, madame, if you had to disguise yourself and you wanted no one to know it was you, what would you wear? A difficult question. Well, the same question I had to pose. Well, you know what the English newspapers reported? Believe it or not, they reported that I, the Marquis de Lafayette, disguised myself in a woman's gown. Can you, well, don't imagine that. Oh, my goodness, you cannot believe everything you read or hear in the papers, my friends. Of course, I did not disguise myself as a woman. I disguised myself as a merchant, there to take part in a bit of commerce with the people of Spain. So, not having any issue with this, they of course allowed me to pass, and true to my word, I went from France to Spain. But what would be my ultimate destination? Close enough. America. That was my destination. And this journey would take me 8 long weeks. I ask you, has anyone present here this evening been to sea for 8 weeks? Ah, monsieur, and you are perhaps of the Navy or perhaps even a pirate at some times? I'll take your word for it as well, monsieur. Well, I will tell you this, monsieur. I am truly glad that I joined the French army and not the French Navy, simply because I was seasick nearly every day of my journey. But my friends, after 8 long weeks, as I looked over the bow of my ship, I could see the Americas for the first time. And we had landed at a place called Yorktown in South Carolina. Oh, I recall this evening perfectly well. For even though it was evening, the moon was so bright. It illuminated everything that we looked upon. So as I put my foot upon American soil for the first time and met you, the good people of the United States, well, what do you think my first impressions were of you, the people of the United States of America? Yes, perhaps it's best not to answer that question. Sadly, it was not a very good one, my friends. For the first Americans I met here in America tried to kill me. An ominous beginning. We had landed at the plantation of a Monsieur Auger, a Benjamin Huger, an ardent patriot for the cause of American freedom, but he had mistaken myself and my companions for Englishmen. Can you imagine, monsieur, mistaking me for an Englishman? In hindsight, I suppose the moon was just not that bright. Well, I quickly assured him that I was not, that I was there to help him in his great and noble cause, and once he realized this, he welcomed me and my companions with open arms. Now, of course, we could not remain overly long. We needed to make our way to Philadelphia City as quickly as possible. So after bidding farewell, thanking him for his kindness, his hospitality, and, well, most assuredly for not killing us, we began the long journey northwards to Philadelphia. It would take us several more weeks, but eventually, upon arrival, and it was a Sunday as I recall, I immediately approached Congress. And there, with my promissory note in hand, signed by your American agent from Connecticut, Monsieur Silas Dean, I said before Congress, honor me so by granting me a command in the Continental Army that I too might fight against tyranny. And now, what does Congress say to me? Thank you for coming, Monsieur le Marquis. We appreciate you offering your services, but we don't need or even want your help. Can you imagine this, my friends? What I had endured up to that moment? I had left my regiment, I must admit, without permission. I had disobeyed the King and Queen of France. I had traveled 8 long weeks at sea, seasick nearly every day. I had nearly been killed by the first Americans I met here in America. I had traveled from South Carolina all the way to Philadelphia City in July, just to be told by your members of Congress to return back to France. Well, my friends, what would you have done? Would you have returned back to France? Oh, I think some of you might have. Oh, of course not. You would persevere, you would overcome, you would triumph in the end, just as I had done. So again, I attempt to speak to Congress, saying, very well, you will not give me a command of soldiers, but perhaps you will allow me to serve as an aide-de-camp, as an assistant to the great man, Washington. Yet again, they say to me, I'm sorry, Monsieur le Marquis, but yet again, this is not possible. Besides, we don't have enough money to pay you. Well, my friends, I finally said boldly to your members of Congress, then I shall serve at my own expense. And would you know it, with those immortal words, your Congress immediately made me a general officer. I could not imagine my good fortune, for as I have mentioned, I was but a captain in the French army and newly promoted only because my father-in-law owns the regiment. But here in America, I'd been made a major general, a general of division. I could command upwards of 5,000 soldiers, yet I never commanded more than 50 in my entire life, and all at the age of 19. Well, good fortune would follow me again, for that very next evening, the people of Philadelphia were holding a ball for General Washington, a party. You know all about parties, don't you, madame? But this one was being held in honor of General Washington for defending the city of brotherly love. You know, when he walked into the room, I knew exactly who he was before he spoke, even though we had never met before. It was simply by the way in which he carried himself. For to me, he was truly an aristocrat without the name, a nobleman without the title. He came forth, he held out his hand, he said to me, I thank you, Monsieur le Marquis, for coming to support this cause. Think of this new place as your new home. Think of the officers around you as your new family. And think of me as your new friend. Well, with this, I could not help myself. I immediately embraced him. I might have embarrassed him a little bit with my French custom. But alas, I said to him, from now on, mon général, j'ai deux patries, la France et les États-Unis d'Amérique. From now on, I shall have two countries, France and the United States of America. And thus, the grand adventure had begun. But my friends, it was not to be all niceties, all frivolity, all minuets. There was a war to be fought. And I would have my first taste of it at a place called Brandywine in Pennsylvania. Now, though I had no soldiers under my direct command, it would be in the midst of this battle that General Washington would turn to me and say, General Lafayette, prevent my left wing from falling back, from retreating. Rally those men, push them back on line. I immediately obeyed his command. I drew my sword. I rode into action. I did my best to encourage them, yet the soldiers marched right by. I dismounted. I tried to stop them. At that precise moment, a musket ball found my leg. My boot began to fill with blood, overflow with blood. I thought I was going to be killed in my first engagement, but I kept my courage. I kept my strength long enough to rally those men. And though General Washington would lose the battle that day, September the 11th of 1777, he was able to save the army. And as long as the army remained, well, the cause of American freedom remained. Well, as for me, the wound had the best of me. First, I would be taken from my horse, then by a stretcher, then by cart, then by boat for several days, and, well, weeks later, do you know where I found myself? In Bethlehem, madame. But not the Holy Land, don't worry, I did not die. I had been nursed back to health by the lovely Moravian girls. I dare say, were it not for them, I would have lost my leg. Well, weeks pass and General Washington sends me a dispatch saying, Monsieur le Marquis, I am so pleased to hear that you are recovering so very well, but you have been away from the field for these many weeks. What has kept you there in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania? I said, Mon Général, you obviously have never met these lovely Moravian girls. But do not think ill of them or of me. It was their devotion to God, to this great cause, and to me, that kept me alive, that saved my leg, and enabled me to continue on in this great struggle. For friends, as you know, there was a dark cloud approaching. General Washington had just given the order to march into what we call winter quarters. Some of you refer to it as the bloody footsteps in the snow, others simply as Valley Forge. Now, my dear American friends, when you decided to declare for independence in July of 1776, did all of you here in former English North America wish to be free and independent from England? What a perfect response. Some say yes, some say no, some don't respond at all. And you know, my friends, that is the reality. That is the breakdown of North America, of English North America, of former English North America. It is believed that it was but 1/3 of the population that wished to be free and independent from England. Now, my mathematics have never been very good, but I do realize that that leaves 2/3 of the population remaining. And of that 2/3, a full third, well, they wished to remain loyal to King George and would fight daily for him. And that remaining third, well, they were undecided. They wanted to see what was going to happen next and thus follow suit. So with 1/3 of the population made not up of great warriors just yet, but rather farmers and tradesmen and shopkeepers, well, they were ready to take up arms and fight against one of the strongest nations on this planet. Why, my friends? Why did they do it? Why did you do it? Well, because you believed in this great and noble cause. You believed in the Declaration of Independence, which stated that all men are created equal, that all would be welcome under the banner of American freedom, no matter who their parents were, the color of their skin, or how much money they had within their pocket, but simply by what they could do, what they could offer to this great nation. And of course they did it for the great man himself, that of General Washington, that he would persevere, that he would overcome, that he would triumph in the end, even at the cost of his own life. It has been a cause worth fighting for. It has been a cause worth dying for. So thus we all marched into the winter encampment at the Valley Forge, and many felt we would never march out again as an army. But fortunately, good news would soon arrive. First in the form of a victory. Rare news back then. This one in the sovereign state of New York at a place called Saratoga. 5,000 of the enemy would be taken there. A grand victory indeed. Next, with the birth of the new year of 1778, well, we would receive assistance in many forms. Many foreign officers like myself would flock to the American banner in the hope that they could lend their assistance, their knowledge, their ability to the great cause of American freedom. One such man was a German, a Prussian to be exact, his name Baron de Steuben. In fact, I know some of you served under his tutelage. You were there, monsieur. I recall seeing you, yes, at the winter encampment. He could not speak English well, could he? Nein, bravo, monsieur. But he could use profanity in every other language, and perhaps that helped to inspire you young volunteers. Well, nonetheless, my friends, it would be the third and most important cause, and that was my country of France, that would sign the Treaty of Alliance in February of 1778, changing the nature of this war. For France would officially recognize the United States of America as its own free and independent nation. And of course, she would declare war upon her age-old enemy, that of England. So now it had become a world war. England would be forced to defend all of her vast land holdings, which of course she has many, to include colonies in the subcontinent of India, in Africa, in the West Indies. She must always defend her interest in Europe and England itself, and at the same time put down this rebellion here in North America. That is a difficult task for any nation, but even more difficult for England. For though she has always had one of the best armies and certainly the best navies in all of the world, one thing she always lacked, that is great numbers of soldiers. So how do you defend so many land holdings with such a small army? Well, of course, you must change your strategy. And her new strategy here in North America was thus. She was to take a small but highly professional army and send it to the southern colonies of North America in the hope that she could find that 1/3 of the population that still wished to remain loyal to King George, raise up new regiments, provisional regiments like the Queen's Rangers, British Legion, American Legion, and others, and thereby secure the entire continent. A sound plan, and one that sadly worked very well at first. We all recall reading about the losses at Savannah in 79, the fall of Charleston in May of 1780, the lesser engagements around that city like Monk's Corner, the massacre at the Waxhaws under Colonel Tarleton in May of 1780, the debacle at Camden in August of 1780. Many of us felt we would never see the year of 1781, yet it arrived. And with it, more good news. For General Washington would dispatch me, the Marquis de Lafayette, right here to Virginia, and I was given 3 tasks. First, well, it was to capture a man we all once called a friend. Yes, do you recall his name? General Benedict. I know some of you are still quite hesitant to even utter his name. In fact, General Washington will not even speak his name, simply referring to him as the traitor. Well, of course, General Benedict Arnold, once he completed his betrayal, his act of Judas, his 30 pieces of silver, well, he was dispatched by his new masters in New York, General Clinton to be specific, here to Virginia. And he was given a task to raid up and down the James River. He arrived here in Virginia in January of 1781 with a task force of nearly 2,000 men. He landed at Westover Plantation, which he made his headquarters. He took Williamsburg and Richmond Town the very next day, up and down the James River, taking all of those vitally needed supplies, because you Virginians remember well that for the most part, Virginia had remained untouched throughout the war, since the departure of the last of the royal governors, John Murray IV, Earl of Dunmore. So thus all of its foodstuffs, military supplies, livestock could all be used for the war effort, whomever could get their hands upon it. Well, I was to capture Benedict Arnold if I was able. Second, I was to stop him from destroying all of these much-needed supplies. And third, well, when General Washington was to give the order, I was to hold the enemy right here in Virginia and not permit them to support the war around New York City with General Clinton, or the war being conducted by Washington's able subordinate in the South, that of General Nathaniel Greene, who had been appointed the commander there since October of 1780. Well, my friends, as you know, upon arrival here in Virginia, I, General Lafayette, really could not complete the first part of my task. Though I fought a few small skirmishes with General Benedict Arnold's men, soon he would be recalled back to New York by Clinton, there to take part in a campaign of destruction against his former neighbors in Connecticut. But replacing him, coming up from fresh victories in the South, was none other than Lord Cornwallis, the most capable of the English commanders. And of course, we fought a cat-and-mouse campaign all summer long, right here in Virginia. Battles such as Point of Forks, Spencer's Ordinary, Green Springs Plantation, until finally, by the close of August, I received the dispatch that I had longed for from General Washington, in which he informed me that he was preparing to march southwards from the upper part of the state of New York, not to attack New York City as initially planned, but rather to come all the way to the tidewater of Virginia, in the hope that he could meet Lord Cornwallis in the open field and defeat him in detail, bring about another Saratoga, and, God willing, an end to this war. And of course, he would not be alone, would he? He would have with him the grand French army, commanded by Jean-Baptiste de Vimeur, le Comte de Rochambeau, who had of course arrived in Newport, Rhode Island, July the 10th and the 11th of 1780. Well, these soldiers marched and soon would arrive in the great city of Williamsburg. On the 13th of September, they arrived with the vanguard, the cavalry, Washington and Rochambeau marching down the high street, and every day thereafter, more battalions, more regiments, more brigades, until all of the divisions were in and around Williamsburg. The time was ready to march. Well, Cornwallis found himself, well, not far from here, in Yorktown. He had set up some feeble defenses, earthworks only. There was no strong defenses that he could defend himself with. But my friends, before the march even began, we had already won a great victory, had we not? This one at sea. For it would be on the 5th day of September of 1781, right at the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay, between Cape Charles and Cape Henry, that the French fleet, commanded by Admiral de Grasse, would defeat the English fleet under Admiral Graves, sending their ships back to New York. What did this mean? This meant that Lord Cornwallis at Yorktown could no longer be resupplied by sea or escape by sea. So thus he had to endure a siege he could not win, a siege he would not win. By the 28th of September, Washington gave the order to march from Williamsburg. We marched to Yorktown. We surrounded this place. We dug our parallel lines. We pushed our guns in place. By the 7th day of October, all was prepared. We began the bombardment. Oh, a fierce bombardment it was. It was more than Cornwallis could handle. 1 week later, on the 14th of October, 1781, under cover of darkness, we seized the last two earthen fortifications, known as Redoubts 9 and 10, on the extreme left wing of Cornwallis's line. By the next morning, we fired point blank into his positions. Well, of course, Cornwallis would try in vain to escape, to cross the York River to Gloucester Point, but proving once again that God is not an Englishman, a great storm would rise up and push his boats back, preventing him from doing so. Well, of course, Cornwallis is a fine officer, and indeed a gentleman. He did not want to see the needless loss of life for his brave soldiers, so he asked to speak for terms of surrender. And of course, that surrender would come, the 19th day of October of 1781, the day we won at Yorktown. But my friends, it was an interesting spectacle to behold, for at that surrender ceremony, Lord Cornwallis was not present. He told us he was not feeling well. I suppose I would not be feeling well if I was forced to surrender 7,000 soldiers, but nonetheless he sent his able second-in-command, an Irishman who commanded his guard regiments, known as General O'Hara, and there, as his custom, was the sword of surrender. Well, there upon the field of surrender, General O'Hara tried to present it to Rochambeau, who is of course senior militarily as well as socially to Washington. But my friends, did Rochambeau command at Yorktown? Indeed not, it was Washington. So Rochambeau said, no, monsieur, I did not command here. You may give it to General Washington. Well, obedient to his word, he tried to present it to Washington. And what did Washington say? No, monsieur, I will not accept surrender from your second-in-command. You may give it to my second-in-command. And who was his second-in-command? Well, of course, you honor me so. It was not me, alas, but rather General Benjamin Lincoln. And this is quite fitting, because was it not Benjamin Lincoln who was forced to surrender Charleston in May of 1780 unconditionally? The same terms that Cornwallis was forced to surrender. Do you know exactement, monsieur? All of the flags, all of their musical instruments, all of their weapons, all would be taken. A great victory indeed. You know, it was interesting to note that the English were so humiliated that they would not look at the American forces who lined one side of the road and the French on the other. They simply marched looking at the French army who they had fought for centuries. Well, I thought we must demand their attention. So as the lead column began to march by, I told our band to strike up Yankee Doodle. And they could not help but look in our direction. So thus they gave us the satisfaction of looking at us as they marched past. Do you know there was another tune being played shortly thereafter, and it was called A World Turned Upside Down. I think for Lord Cornwallis, I think for Parliament, and most assuredly for England, the world has been turned upside down. But Washington has said something fascinating to me upon my new return here to America in 1784. He said, Monsieur le Marquis, I do believe that the easy part was winning the war. Can you imagine that, monsieur? The easy part. Well, he explained himself. He said, I do believe that the much more difficult part will be for 13 former colonies that have now formed 13 United States, well, getting along with one another and surviving. Well, you have survived these few months. That is a good beginning. Let us hope that this great land of the United States shall persevere forevermore. Let us hope it shall serve as a beacon for all peoples throughout the world, as the truest example of where freedom and independence might be obtained. God bless you all, my friends, and God bless the United States of America! I thank you, my dear friends of liberty, but I am certain that some of you must have some questions or queries of me, the Marquis de Lafayette, about my exploits of the past, of the present, and, as always, hopes for the future. So, my friends, what shall be the subject of conversation this evening? Yes, monsieur.
When was the first time you met Thomas Jefferson?
Ah, monsieur asked the question, when was the first time that I had the honor and pleasure of meeting Monsieur Thomas Jefferson? Well, it was when I was dispatched here to Virginia to command the Light Infantry Division for this Virginia campaign of 1781. He had just transferred over from Governor of Virginia. Many people have spoken ill of Monsieur Jefferson, of his wartime governorcy, but he had a rather difficult time of it. There were no continental troops to speak of. There was but a few militia, and he was narrowly taken. In fact, many members of the Virginia legislature were in fact taken at that time, and to include himself, were it not for the courageous acts of Monsieur Jack Jewett near his beloved home at Monticello, who warned him before Colonel Tarleton's dragoons were able to take him. But I did have the pleasure of meeting him, and of course corresponding corresponding with him. And, monsieur, you might be unaware that your country has just dispatched Monsieur Jefferson to France to serve as ambassador. And I will tell you another secret, my dear friends. We have just had a newborn child, a young lady, whom we've called Marie Antoinette, in honor of the Queen, of course, but we have added one additional name by recommendation of your newly appointed ambassador, Monsieur Thomas Jefferson, and that name is, of course, Virginia. Indeed. So I hope that now that he is billeted with his new position in Paris itself, that we will have the golden opportunity to speak at length of many subjects. I admire him very much. I want to find what his inspiration was for the Declaration of Independence, what his motivation is for the form of government that he and you, the people of America, wish to adopt as a result. A great man, a philosopher from America. Other questions or queries? Yes, monsieur. What a bizarre question you ask, monsieur. Monsieur asks, what did I do during the French Revolution and did I serve under Napoleon? He sounds like an Italian, or at least a Corsican. Well, monsieur, in this year of 1784, perhaps your jest is not so much of a jest. Perhaps you speak of what perhaps could be upon the horizon. For as you know, my friends, you read the Gazettes, some of you perhaps have even ventured to France itself. Of the 24 million French subjects, many of them do, monsieur, live in deplorable conditions. And many of them are in want of change. They cry out in the streets for liberté, égalité, fraternité. They say it is all fine and well that we have helped our American friends here in America, but what about the people of France? Well, many people, like myself, are of the opinion that now is the time for change, to alter the French monarchy. Am I saying to remove the king? Certainly not. My family has served the kings of France for 1,000 years, and God willing will serve them for 1,000 more. But I do believe it is time to alter the monarchy, perhaps to create a constitutional monarchy with a more substantial legislative body. For example, monsieur, perhaps we could retain the king as the chief executive, of course, but in the form of a legislative body. We could call it a Congress or a parliament or perhaps an Assemblée Nationale, a national assembly of elected representatives, no matter what class in society they come from. So, whether they come from the great cities of the north around Boulogne or Arras, in the east at Strasbourg or Metz, in the south at Toulon or Marseille, or in the west at La Rochelle or Rochefort, or the center around Paris or Versailles. It matters not what class in society, as long as they are speaking on behalf of the people they represent. They could report to this Assemblée Nationale and inform the king of their difficulties. So if the people are starving, they will be fed. If a new bridge needs to be constructed, it will be built to add to commerce or simply to the livelihood of the people. In some of the outlying provinces, there are bandits, criminals who run rampant. Perhaps the gendarmerie or soldiers could be billeted there to add to the safety of the people who reside there. Well, this cannot be done unless my king will adopt this new idea, because sadly he surrounds himself with people who tell him what he wants to hear and not what he needs to hear. So perhaps your jest as a revolution in France, I would have asked you, monsieur, a revolution in what? Fashion, food, politics? That occurs nearly every day in France. And as to this Napoleon Bonaparte, do you know, that is interesting to note. Upon my departure, after leaving the Chateau de Chavagnac, excuse me, en route here to my ship to come to America yet again, I encountered a young cadet at the École Militaire in Paris. And I think he called himself not Napoleon Bonaparte, but Napoleone Bonaparte. He sounded more Italian, and he informed me that he resided in Corsica, and he had just finished his training at the École Militaire in the artillery. He didn't look like he would amount to much at all, monsieur, but perhaps he will in the future. Who knows? Other questions or queries? Yes, madame. Indeed, if I may, madame, I shall relay that story. Madame is speaking of a man who was put in my service named James Armistead from New Kent County, just south of Richmond Town. Well, as I would discover, Monsieur Armistead, a man who believed in the great cause of American freedom, was unable to serve himself. But alas, he still wanted to serve the cause of American freedom, so he gave some of his property in the form of a slave, that of James Armistead. He was put in my service to do with whatever I wish, to be a body servant, a valet de chambre, or perhaps just to assist me in my daily activities. So when put in my service, it came to my attention that he was able to make his way also into the encampment of Lord Cornwallis during this campaign of 1781, to serve in the exact same capacity, to stand there with tray in hand, perhaps with wine or cheese or foodstuffs, or simply as a wallflower, listening to all of the councils of war that Lord Cornwallis would conduct with General O'Hara, with that of Colonel York, or that of Colonel Dundas, his chief commanders during this campaign of 1781. Well, it was amazing, madame, because as he made his way back and forth from these two encampments, he was able to give me vital information and to reveal false information to Lord Cornwallis, which greatly brought us to the point at Yorktown. And it is true, upon conclusion of the siege at Yorktown, well, eventually Lord Cornwallis was feeling better, at least feeling better enough to have a dinner party, and there by my side was none other than James Armistead. Oh, to the great surprise of Lord Cornwallis. Indeed, if I recall correctly, he did say checkmate. Indeed, a wonderful story. But madame, the story does not end there. Alas, James Armistead, who put himself in harm's way, just the same as any other soldier serving the great cause of American freedom, is still enslaved. Yet he fought for the rights and liberties of the American people. I shall do everything within my power to bring about his freedom, madam, to write letters, to lend money, to lend my name in whatever capacity to bring about his freedom, because he is a true American patriot who risked his life in defense of American freedom. Thank you, madame, for asking that question so we could bring to light the great name of James Armistead. Other questions, my dear friends? Yes, madame.
Did Congress ever give you any money?
Ah, madame asked, did Congress ever give me any money? No, madame, nor have I asked for it. Just the honor and privilege of commanding brave American soldiers in battle to achieve independence. That is all I ask. And all I will ever want from America is the honor and privilege of commanding these brave soldiers and being part of this grand revolution that achieved American independence. Madame.
Didn't you use some of your own fortune to help the war?
I did indeed, madame. Madame asked, did I not use some of my own fortune to assist in this great cause? Well, not only did I purchase a ship outright, the first ship that I arrived in America, and that was called La Victoire. I purchased it outright, and I brought some gold and silver and supplies. But upon my second return, it was a ship called the Hermione. And the Hermione, which was constructed in 1779 in Rochefort, it was a frigate, a fast ship of 32 guns, if I am correct, commanded by a lieutenant normally, but of course he's captain of the ship, Latouche, and he was a superb captain, and he brought me safely, not with the French army, but with letters from the king to give to Congress and to Washington, stating that soon a great French armada would arrive in America, as well as French soldiers, of course, that would be commanded by Le Comte de Rochambeau. But in the hull of that ship, I of course had gold, silver, shoes, uniforms, cartouche boxes, muskets, sabers, saddles, bridles, blankets, equipment, everything that the soldiers of the Light Infantry Division would be in need of, knowing that I was shortly thereafter going to be given command of this elite division. So yes, madame, I did spend a great deal of my own money, but you cannot put a price upon freedom. You cannot put a price upon liberty. So this money was well spent in the cause of American freedom. Yes, madame. Ah, there is the voice of reason from the back of the room. Madame asks of my lovely wife. Yes, indeed, my lovely wife, Adrienne de Noailles, of which we have been married since April the 11th of 1774, when I was 16 and she was 14. You see, I've not forgotten my anniversary. But it was an arranged marriage, as many of you could imagine. And what is an arranged marriage? It does not seem to be so very popular here in America. But in Europe it is very popular, in which it is sadly a bit like a business transaction, in which one family will marry into another. Perhaps one has a great fortune, but not a great name. And one has a great name, but not a great fortune. I was blessed in both categories because not only did we both have great names, well-known names in the history of France, but both of us had a great fortune as well. And what did she think of this? Well, my wife, when marrying into the Lafayette family, realized that she had married into a military family, one in which we would find glory and honor upon a battlefield, even unto our death, like my father had been killed at the Battle of Minden, August the 1st of 1759, when I was 1 month shy of my 2nd birthday. So it was the expectation that I would go to war, that I perhaps would be killed at a young age. In fact, some will joke and say, why is it that you, the Lafayettes, have such a long name with so many saintly names attached to it? Marie, Joseph, Paul Ivroche, Gilbert de Moutier, le Marquis de Lafayette. Well, it is thought that perhaps the good Lord will have mercy upon the Lafayettes, that we will live long enough to produce the next heir to the title of Marquis. Well, our first child, Henriette, she was born in 75, and she would pass while I was here in America. Most distressful to me, but even more so to my wife, who was left back in France. But since then, we have had the birth of more children. Another daughter we have called Anastasia. A son, whom we've named George Washington Lafayette, if you doubt my allegiance to the great man or to this great cause. And our youngest I have already spoken of, that of Marie Antoinette Virginie. So we have indeed been blessed. And my wife is not only the most beautiful woman in all of the world, but much more importantly, she is the most understanding woman in all of the world and supports me in all of my endeavors. Other questions or queries? Yes, monsieur.
On your last return trip to
Indeed, I have claimed to all Americans, j'ai deux patries, la France et les États-Unis d'Amérique. I have 2 countries now, France and the United States of America, but I have not been bestowed an honorary document that says that I am an American citizen as of this year of 1784, but perhaps you could suggest it, monsieur? Perhaps one day. Well, my dear friends, I am so very honored that so many of you have joined me here this evening for my talk about my experiences here in America, of the fight for freedom, of the battles that we have fought, of the sacrifices that were made. But my friends, even though the war is won, the country is not yet complete. Let us continue to persevere and move forward to make this nation even greater than it already is. Let us hope that it shall be that beacon upon the hill for all to look to as the example of what to follow into the future, of where freedom, independence, and justice can all be obtained. God bless you, my friends, and this great nation of the United States of America. Thank you, my friends.